All right, time for a little bit of Q&A for the patrons. We've got 8 questions today, and so I'll get through these as thoroughly but as quickly, as possible. Wow, excuse me about that. I've got my apple cider vinegar drink here. Very tasty. Anyway, yeah, but I just wanted to say to all the patrons, thank you so much for your support. Actually, last month, you bought me a number of books related to the subject of social justice, including Woke Church, which we've been doing sort of a long-form review response thing to. And so I do plan on doing that. And actually, there was one of you who asked about the foreword that Ligon Duncan wrote. And so I was thinking I'll probably do a short video about that foreword itself at the end of the review. So I'll tell you what my thoughts are on Ligon Duncan's endorsement, essentially, of this book when I'm done reviewing it. So that's my plans for right now. I do have some other plans as far as books to review, but obviously if you guys have any specific questions or specific books that you'd like me to take a look at, I'll certainly do that. Anyway, all right, so the first question. Now, question number 1. In a recent video, you mentioned giving and how it's mandatory for believers. I certainly believe this too, but in your view, should we still be giving 10% to the church, as that is traditionally considered the tithe one should give? So the tithe is, I think, so this is debatable, I think, even in Reformdom to some degree. But the tithe is, in my opinion, part of the ceremonial law of God. The ceremonial law was completely done by Christ. He finished that. And so the ceremonial law is something that, Reformed people understand is no longer in place. We don't circumcise people. We don't do the feast days, things like that. And I would say we don't have the tithe that Israel had. So when the nation of Israel went away, the tithe also went away. But the tithe itself was a formalized ceremonial thing that Israel did, but it was also a principle that was already in play before the law of God. So if you look at the Old Testament, Abraham tithed and things like that. And so the principle of giving to the church, I think, is still in play for sure. If you look at the New Testament, Paul talks about how we have a requirement to support our ministers. That's something that we should do. And in turn, the church should be providing certain things for the people. I mean, whether that's education or emergency food if necessary, things like that. Like, the church should be doing a lot of these social services that the government does right now. And so should you still give 10%? Yeah, I think you should. I don't think it's not technically the tithe that you read about in Israel, but it's still something that I think is there's a principle there that is still true, that was always true even before the law of God, and that did not die with Israel, the nation anyway. And so, yeah, I think you should still give to the church. It's not technically the ceremonial tithe that Israel got, but it is still a principle that we should do. Now, I think that 10% is a floor too. I think that if you can give more, you should give more. And I think that there is potentially some wiggle room that if you're in a situation where you just can't, I think that that's probably okay, although don't quote me on that. I think that's debatable. I think that we have evidence that in the scripture that poor people can give 10% as well. But I think that there would be some return on that for poor people. Like, if you didn't have food, like maybe you still tithe, but the church would still provide for some of your needs and things like that. There's a whole bunch of stuff the church should be doing that they aren't doing. And one of the ways that we could do that is if they had more money, you know what I mean? So that's what I would say about the tithe. Now, there's another debate here too. I know you didn't ask this question, but is the 10% on the gross and the net? And if you look online, you're going to see so many competing answers to that question. I don't really understand why that there's so much confusion there. I think it's clearly the net. So here's what I'll say about the net and the gross. So a couple things. So one thing Greg Bonson noticed about the tithe is that God's law, he said, is never even ridiculous, even theoretically. So God's law is never ridiculous, even theoretically. Theoretically, a government could take 95% of your income and say, hey, that's your income tax. And then all of a sudden, it's impossible for you to give 10% of the gross because the government just took 95% of your money. That's actually happened in history. So it's not, not like just this theoretical thing that could happen. It actually has happened. So I don't think God's law could be made ridiculous by man's law. So that's one reason. But the other thing is the Bible talks about tithing on the increase. And I think that the taxes that we pay and essentially are taken from us, I think are part of the cost of doing business, part of the cost of living. And so it's the increase is after that's taken away because the government just takes that from you. It might be illegitimate, but they definitely take that from you. I also think that the tithe kind of gives us a ceiling for what taxes could ever be. If the government is taking more than what the tithe that God would take is, that's a very big hint that you have an unjust tax system. You have stealing going on. The government shouldn't even take close to the tithe. But they do. So that's what I would say. I would say that technically the tithe is no longer valid or no longer in play for the people of God. However, the principle of 10% is still a good one. We should still be supporting our ministers. The church should be doing lots of different things. So there should be stuff that the church gives back through the tithe. And it should be on the net as well. Hope that was helpful. Question number 2. I have a friend at RTS who's writing a thesis on segregation and how the church should address it. Any advice for him? Yeah. Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. Well, you know, I would. So you got to be honest, obviously. So whatever your friend believes about how the church should address segregation, that's what he should. That's what he should write. I would make sure to tell your friend that, you know, you have to understand that there's a good chance that your teachers are social justice minded people. There's a very good chance of that. Not saying that they definitely are, but there's a very good chance of that. So just to keep that in mind when he's addressing these things, if he decides to sort of go after some of the social justice strategies for segregation, which aren't correct, by the way, then just keep in mind that he'll have to defend that. He'll have to make sure to represent these people fairly and graciously. I mean, this is good advice in general. You should do this, but especially knowing that your teacher very well could be a social justice advocate. But as far as how the church should address segregation, I think it's pretty clear in the Bible that the Christians cannot show partiality in any way. And so if your church is majority white and you happen to live in a multicultural area where there's blacks, whites, Asians, Latinos, whatever, I think that it's a good idea to consider, is there something we're doing that is showing partiality, and that's why blacks or Latinos and whatever aren't coming. But that just because that there's a disparity doesn't mean that you're doing something wrong. I think that showing partiality very clearly, Paul is adamantly against showing partiality. The Old Testament is adamantly against showing partiality. But there's nothing wrong as far as if your church happens to be very mono-ethnic, but it's not doing anything wrong. There's no partiality. It's just how it is. I mean, maybe it's your style, maybe it's your music. There's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And so as far as the church itself, practicing just standard church discipline, the way you would handle any sin issue. If there's partiality in your congregation, whether it's in the church or externally or whatever, you deal with that by the normal means of church discipline. You go to them, you confront them. If they don't listen, you confront them with more people. If you don't listen, you bring it to the elders. If you don't listen, you're excommunicated. Listen, if somebody, when I was on the conversation with the brothers from Native Speaks, I said, you know, I wouldn't make segregation illegal. And they were pretty shocked by that, right? And I said, but at the same time, if it was someone in my congregation that was doing it, that would be something that's excommunicatable. You know what I mean? I could anathematize someone for that, and I would if they didn't repent for showing partiality in their business dealings or whatever. So that's what I would say. I don't know if that quite answers your question, but hopefully it does. Here's question 3. It says, can you share about your video creation workflow and tips for making awesome videos on a short time frame? Well, thank you for the compliment. I hope that they're getting better. I don't know if they are, but you know, I've got a normal job. I've got 2 kids. I've got a third on the way. So I do this as quickly as I can with at the same time having decent content. I would say that I am constantly making lists about different video ideas. Sometimes they come up in the course of conversation about social justice. Sometimes they just come to me like right before I go to bed, something like that. And I'll just write them down real quick. And I have a list, and I've got like probably like, I don't know, probably like 20, 30 things on this list. And I, you know, cross things out as I do them, or I take them off because I think they're not a good idea. Also, another good thing about doing lists is that a lot of times, like if you put it on a list and then think about it and then maybe talk to people about it, if it's a bad idea or if it's like maybe like a little too aggressive or like maybe like sinful in some way, you won't do it. So I don't like put things out there immediately. I usually let it marinate for a bit. Sometimes I put it out immediately, but I've had more than a few ideas that I've run by people, and they're like, yeah, don't do that. Don't do that. And so that's what I do. So I write lists, and then if it's complicated, I'll do a little research first. If it's not, if it's very basic, and this is the thing about social justice, a lot of these things are very basic Christianity, so you don't really have to do a lot of research to know that you shouldn't be segregating Christian fellowship, right? Like that was so preposterous. You don't have to do a lot of research to know that hip hop has not had a better influence on race relations than the 2,000-year-old Church of Jesus Christ. Like these are very basic things, and so so that's what I'll do. I'll do a little research. And if it's complicated, like I said, I'll make an outline or maybe write key points, what I want to do. What I'm doing with this woke church thing, this is what I'm doing. All I'm doing is, like, if there's something I want to talk about, I'll just write it in the margin. So, I mean, this is a very small book. It's a very short book, but if there's something I want to talk about, I'll write it in the margin, and then it'll remind me. So that's almost like my outline here on this book. But that's what I do. I mean, I think... so I spend, a decent amount of time, 20 minutes, doing the video, recording it, and then I'll spend probably half an hour editing it, maybe less. It depends on the situation. Some videos need more editing. Some videos hardly need any editing at all. And then what I'll do is I'll do a workout. Like I'll go on the elliptical for half an hour, and I'll listen to it, and then I'll make sure that it's actually good, or make sure it doesn't need any more editing. So usually I listen to my own videos before I put them out. That's not always the case, but most of the time I do it. And so usually the whole process is like an hour maybe total, depending on the content, depending on the video. But I do it first thing in the morning typically. This one I'm doing at night, but yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, it's just a lot of lists, sometimes outlines, sometimes research, and that kind of thing. So hope that answers your question. Thank you so much for your patronage. Okay, let me get a sip of my apple cider vinegar drink. I am a little bit of a Vermonter, so I drink weird stuff, and also drink like a kale smoothie that's just kale, like all kale, a little bit of water, a little bit of lemon juice, and that's all it is. It's disgusting, but anyway, here's question 4. This one makes me sad, but let's just hear it out. The question is, my home pastor is on the board of the Gospel Coalition and is great friends with Dr. Russell Moore. Although I don't think he is a social justice warrior, my pastor has continuously brushed off the important portions of my emails detailing my concerns about his friends. This month, Russell is coming to speak at my church. I feel so conflicted about this that I've decided to leave my church. Should I just leave quietly, or should I send one last email to my pastor to let him know? This is tough, man. This is tough. So I've left a church before, and I've said this before that I regret. Sorry, I'm checking my kids. I'm watching my kids, and they're on the monitor here. I've left the church before, and I regretted it afterwards. Even though I think I left for legitimate reasons. I think I left for a legitimate reason. They were dabbling in Bethel Church type stuff, and very serious situation. So I left that church, and I still think it was good reason, but I kind of regret it. I feel like I should have been longer suffering. So I'm not going to tell you what to do, whoever is asking this question. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I would just say that obviously I'm assuming you've prayed about this and you've resolved to be long suffering, but it's just come to a head. That's what I'm assuming about this question. I don't think that most Christians just leave churches on a whim. But if you're going to leave the church, I wouldn't go out in a blaze of glory, but I would tell your pastor about why you've decided to leave. I don't think you should just leave quietly. And so when you send this email to the pastor, one last email telling him why you're leaving, don't blast him, don't blast his friends, but be very frank and just say, hey, this is why I'm leaving. And I want you to know why I feel like this is so important. I feel like, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but why it's dangerous, why it's so important, and what the concerns you have for the fellowship are. That's what I would do, man, because, or lady, I'm not really sure. but that's what I would do. I would just be very honest with them. I wouldn't leave quietly. I would just just disappear. I would tell them what's going on, but I wouldn't try to blast him. Wouldn't try to get any zingers in there. Just be very honest and frank, and honestly be open about how you're feeling and why you think it's unbiblical and all of that kind of stuff. Again, after prayer, after lots of thinking, after trying to be long suffering, that's what I would do. And so this is something that's this is happening all across the country right now. I mean, I get emails after emails and messages that sound so similar to this. It's like even people very close to me that this is happening, and this is the social justice movement, the whole idea, the critical theory and cultural Marxism. This is all intentional. Like, I'm not saying that the people in the church are doing this intentionally. I have my suspicions about some evangelical leaders who are subverting things intentionally. I think that there are some that are doing that. I'm not going to say anything about that right now because I don't have any proof, and it's just in my opinion. But there are some wolves. The Bible tells us there are definitely wolves that are intentionally doing these things because they're evil, because they're sons of Satan. You know what I mean? But I think the run-of-the-mill social justice person is not like that. I think that they just think they're doing the right thing. They're deceived, and they're going along with this. And they're like your pastor, where it's like they don't really see how it's such a big deal. They're not a social justice warrior, but they're also not vigilant enough to see this coming. And so even though they're not intentionally subverting things, they are part of the subversion. This is all happening, and this is happening in churches all across the country, and it's intentional, and it's just something we need to pray for, man. We need to pray for this because this is such a sad thing. Churches will be split up. Denominations will be split up. I think that there's two denominations in particular that are in their death throes right now, and they will be splitting. There's just these are irreconcilable worldviews. They just don't go together. So pray for the church, guys. I mean, this is not just one person who's going through this. The person who wrote me this question, you're not the only one going through this, man. There are tons of people going through this, just like you, and it's sad and it's heart-wrenching, but it might come to the fact of just leaving churches. It might come to that. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but it seems like you've already made your decision, and so I just pray for you, pray for your pastor, and pray that you find a new church. But anyway, that's what I would say about that. This same person asks, what do you think about Jordan Peterson? I'm surprised that I haven't been asked this already. Jordan Peterson's cool, man. I like Jordan Peterson. So I think Jordan Peterson has a lot to say, a lot of good things to say about postmodernism and the problems that the Western civilization faces. There is a lot of common grace with Jordan Peterson. Now, you didn't ask about this. And it's funny because Jordan Peterson is kind of almost self-consciously knowing that he gets a lot of this stuff from Christianity. He's not a Christian, although I've heard him say before that he acts like a Christian. I wouldn't say that, I wouldn't go that far, but a lot of the good things that he teaches, he's borrowing from Christianity. There's just no question about that. He is self-conscious that a lot of his foundational beliefs are religious beliefs. And so he knows that, even though he doesn't believe Jesus Christ is God incarnate. So a lot of people would say, you did ask this, but I thought this is interesting. A lot of people would say that it's imbalanced for people on my side to like Jordan Peterson and maybe quote him. I've never quoted him, I don't think, but and maybe to like cite some of the things he says about postmodernism and social justice warriors and things like that. But it's hypocritical for us to criticize the social justice warriors for quoting James Cone or Dr. Martin Luther King or some of these heretics and unbelievers in social justice. They would say that that's hypocritical. And I don't think that's actually true. I think, so here's the thing. Like, first of all, if you're quoting Jordan Peterson on Christianity and morality and ethics and things like that, yeah, I think you've got a problem because he doesn't have a good enough foundation for morality and ethics. Now, not accidentally. He does end up in the right place a lot of the time, but again, that's because he's borrowing from Christianity. But so we're not talking about morality and ethics. We're talking about his analysis of political situations or sociological situations. So, but if you're quoting like James Cone, like an actual heretic, on like sin issues and ethics and morality, like that's a problem. That's a big problem. You know what I mean? That doesn't make sense. If you're quoting Marxists and you're saying, well, it's okay for me to quote Marxists because you quote Jordan Peterson. Well, that doesn't make sense, because if you're quoting Marxists that are pushing Marxist ideas at the time, in the quotes that you're using, like I'm never going to quote Jordan Peterson in a positive light in something that he's saying evil, right? But yet you're quoting a Marxist promoting evil Marxist doctrines, and you're saying it's okay because you're a Christian? Like, no. Like the quotes you're using are evil. You know what I mean? Like I'm not going to quote Jordan Peterson saying something about how homosexuality is just fine. But I would quote him about, you know, something that is unrelated to that, where it's actually true what he's saying. I find that so weird. It's like, why are you calling me a Marxist? And I'm like, well, you're quoting Marxists. He's like, well, you know, I'm not really a Marxist. I just think what they're saying here is right. And then I'm like, but what they're saying here is Marxism. You know what I mean? Like I just don't get that. Now, is there some inconsistency in the way some people use Jordan Peterson? I don't know, probably. But yeah, that's what I think about Jordan Peterson. I think he's a lot of common grace there, but you got to watch out because he's not a believer, and so his foundations are all messed up. There's a great quote by Rushdoony that says, "Look, if you don't acknowledge Christ, if you don't fear the Lord, then you have no sense of reality. You haven't even started with wisdom yet." And that's true of unbelievers. They accidentally have some knowledge, but they can't really be truly wise because they have missed the most foundational, obvious fact in the universe, that Christ is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. All right, question 6. Why is it, in your view, so hard to get SJW Christians to sit down for a discussion with anyone who disagrees with them? Well, I'm just going to be honest here. I think that they know that they will lose that conversation. And I mean lose like they will have no defense of what they believe. They will have no defense of what they believe. I think that social justice warriors emote a lot, and they know that emotion, when it meets logic, doesn't do very well. Emotion can only do very well in a vacuum or with like undisciplined like people on the other side. So in other words, if you're like this emotional sort of making emotional arguments about how can we please think of the children, you know, stuff like that, and then the person on the other side is calm and collected, like Jordan Peterson. Like when Jordan Peterson was on that British talk show, and the woman's just emoting, you know what I mean? Emotion after emotion, all this nonsense, and he's just sitting there with his legs crossed, you know, calm, cool as a cucumber, calm. Like she got decimated in that interview. But if you had a hothead on the other side that was like, you know, just spouting out, shooting off at the mouth and things like that, it might go better. But the thing is, like a guy like me, a lot of people think I'm a hothead, but I'm really not. I mean, if you saw the Native Speaks conversation, I don't think that I was angry or on the inside. There's a few times where I was very frustrated and very angry, but I don't think it came through really. And so I think that people on the SJW side don't want to sit down with a guy like me because there's nothing in it for them. They won't get to emote all day and gain any ground because I'm not going to give it to them. I'm just going to sit there, you know, very calmly listen to them and then respond to them with, you know, facts and logic and reason and Bible verses, and then they're just going to emote some more and they're going to look bad. That's why I think they don't do it. I think that they know there's nothing in it for them. That the emotions are all they need. So as long as they can stir up the emotions and things like that, they can get you to go along with them. But once you get caught into an exegetical debate or a logical debate or a reasoned debate, you're not going to do very well. That's why I think they don't sit down. Maybe someone can prove me wrong. Maybe someone will sit down with someone on our side. I don't know. I don't know. But that's my opinion. I think that they know that there's nothing to gain and everything to lose. That's why they don't sit down. That's why Alexandria Ocasio, the Puerto Rican socialist in the Bronx, she won't debate anyone, even for charity, because she would be embarrassed. And there's just no question about that. That's my opinion. All right. Question 7. If you could have any superpower, what would it be? That's a tough question, man. Can I be honest? Honestly, I think invisibility. And there's all kinds of mischief you could get into if you had invisibility. But sometimes, you know, I just would like to turn it on when I just need a little alone time, you know. I can be a little bit of a not a loner, but an introvert at times, you know. Yeah, invisibility would be good. You could do a lot. You could do a lot with invisibility. You could sneak around. You could spy. Although I will say with invisibility, you can get into the most trouble as well. So yeah, I think invisibility would be mine. You know, as long as we're talking in hypotheticals, or if I just be a Jedi, that'd be awesome. You know, you can change people's minds and move things, telekinesis, and you know, things like that. That would be awesome. And plus, you get a lightsaber as well. All right, last question. Do you think all pastors today have a divine calling to do their job, or is there a lot of them that wish themselves to be? I think I know what this question means. I think it's asking if everyone has a divine calling that's a pastor, or if some people are just being pastors and they don't have a divine calling. My opinion on this is that it's kind of like marriage, right? Like, how do you know you're married to the right person? Well, because you're married to them. You know, you've heard that before, and I think it's kind of similar with being a pastor. I mean, if you're a pastor of a church and you know, people have laid hands on you and all of that, then you are called by God to pastor that church. Like, if you want to know if you're called by God to be a pastor, then see if you're a pastor. You know what I mean? It doesn't exactly work exactly the same way, but that's what I would say. So if they're a pastor right now, then they're called by God to pastor that church faithfully. And so are there people that are pastors right now that probably shouldn't be pastors? Yeah, definitely. But they're still called by God. The way I understand sovereignty is that they're still called by God to do the right thing, even if they're unqualified and shouldn't be doing it and should resign today. That's what I would say. I think that there are some pastors out there that are feminine. What I mean by that is that they have feminine qualities to them, and a pastor needs to be a man because it's a job that a man needs to do. I mean, there are things about being a pastor that it would not be appropriate for a woman to do, and that's how complementarianism works. So the role of pastor requires a manly man, and so if you're a pastor and you're effeminate, or you're a pastor and you're a soft man, you shouldn't be a pastor. But you're still called by God to be that pastor and be not effeminate and be a manly man, things like that. And so yeah, all pastors today have a divine calling, but some of them should resign immediately from that divine calling and essentially be converted. So that's kind of how I see it. I mean, again, it's like the thing with marriage. How do you know you're married to the right person? You're married to them. That's how you know. So yeah, that's what I would say. I would also say too that there are a lot of pastors that are like influencers today. I know you didn't ask this, but I'm just going to answer it anyway. That are influencers today that really shouldn't be. They're just not. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're talking about on a lot of key issues. They've compromised on key issues, and there are a few issues in our country today that if you don't get those right, then you have no business giving anyone any advice ever about anything. And a lot of the key issues are very basic, but for some reason, pastors of big flocks are just failing on them, and I just don't get it. I think it's judgment from God, to be perfectly honest with you. But anyway, those are the questions for this month. So I'm looking forward to another month with all of you fine patrons. We'll do another Q&A for next month, and what I want to do is give someone an opportunity to recommend an article or a book or something. Let me get my 12-sided die here. There we go. Here's my 12-sided dice. Let's just give this a shot. All right. Number 9. So whoever was the 9th person to be my patron will get to give me an article to review or a video or something like that. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for your support. Again, you bought me some pretty good resources. Well, let me say this. You bought me some good resources for the channel. But I don't know, man. Is this really a nice gift or is this really a curse? I don't know, man. But thank you, seriously, because I would have bought this anyway. And the ability to buy this without having my family's budget take a ding, at least for the time being, is great. So thank you so much. I appreciate it so much. If there's anything that I could do to change the channel or make it more relevant to you or more helpful to you, please let me know. I'd be glad to consider doing it. Anyway, I hope this was helpful. God bless.